When drawing from life, the first thing that you need to consider is how you're going to plan out your image onto your page. So I'm drawing a bird that's quite tall and thin. So I have my paper positioned in a vertical position or portrait format. If your object or your image is wider than it is tall, you might want to turn your paper so that it is in a horizontal position or landscape format. Now I'm going to continue to plan out my drawing by marking out where the top and bottom of my bird will land. So I'm making a mark for the top of the bird's head, and the bird's feet will be about halfway down my page, and the rest will be the branch. So you might also want to make a mark for the left-hand side of your bird and the right-hand side, or any important points. And your drawing should fill your paper, so think carefully about how you're going to fit your bird into the piece of paper that you have. Now that I've planned out where my drawing is going to go and where my bird is going to fit on my page, I want to start looking for the angles that exist in my bird. And this is going to allow me to get a more accurate shape in my drawing. And to do this, I'm actually going to use my pencil as a tool to help find that angle. So if I hold my pencil right up to this bird, I can see it's not straight up and down. So I'm going to match the angle with my pencil. And it helps to keep one eye closed as you're doing this so you can see your bird and your pencil at the same time. Now I'm just going to hold that angle in place, pull it down to my piece of paper, and make a mark for where that angle should be. And this is a guideline, so be sure to keep it light and sketchy. Now that I've identified the angles in my bird, I'm going to start my drawing by looking for basic shapes that I can see. And I want to start with the largest shapes first. So that would be the body of the bird and the head. So now I'm going to begin to build up my drawing using basic shapes. And the overall shape of my bird is kind of a long, skinny oval. So I'm adding that in just now. And then there's a small circle for the bird's head that I'm going to add. Now these are just guidelines, so you want to keep it light and sketchy because we will be rubbing out these lines later on. And you'll notice that as I'm adding my basic shapes, I'm also following that guideline that I created earlier. So I'm following along the angle that I found. So already you can see how these guidelines are going to help you build up your drawing and achieve a more accurate drawing. So now that I've planned out the overall shapes of my bird using basic shapes, I can start to add smaller and smaller shapes in. So you can start to add the shapes of the legs of your bird, the wings, and use your pencil again to help you find the angles of those different shapes. And at this stage, you should only worry about the outlines of shapes. So don't worry about details like feathers or anything like that just yet. That will come later on. So now that I have most of my basic shapes in, I'm going to start to refine my line a little bit, just so it's a bit more detailed and a bit more accurate. You'll notice that up until this point, I've been using a very light and sketchy line, so those are my guidelines. Now I'm going to go over it with a more confident, bolder line. And to do this, I'm looking very carefully at my bird. I have it straight ahead of me. I'm keeping my head still, and I'm following along the outside edges of my bird. So when you are doing observational drawing, it's very important you keep your head straight, you keep your head still. If you move it around, your bird will start to change angles and it'll start to look a little different. So keep your head straight and just move your eyes up and down from your object that you're drawing to your paper. So I'm following along the lines that I see very carefully, adding a bit more detail as I go with a slightly heavier, bolder, and more detailed line. Adding inside shapes like in my case, the beak of the bird and the eye of the bird, it can be quite tricky to get the position just right. So it may be useful to once again point out or mark out important points for these shapes. So you can also think about it in terms of an X and Y axis. So for instance, the edge of my beak, I find that that is positioned, that mark should be about halfway over on the bird's head, and the top of the beak is maybe a third of the way down in the bird's head. So marking out these important points can help you position your inside shapes and get the scale or size of your shapes just right. Now I want to add the eye of my bird, and I'm thinking about proportion. I want to make sure it's in the correct position and it's the correct size in relation to everything else in the bird, in relation to the beak. So I can use my pencil tool once again, this time holding it horizontally, so completely straight, and I can see where does the top of the beak line up in relation to the eye. So it looks like the top of the beak lines up with the middle of the eye. So I can kind of mark that out on my drawing just now. And when you're adding these smaller detailed shapes, pay close attention to the curves and the lines that you're actually looking at. So even though the bird's eye is circular, it's not just a circle. So I'm taking my time with the curves of the eye and trying to get them just right. Now I'm going to add the rest of my details in. So I'm working on the feet. I'm using my pencil tool again to get the angles just right. I'm paying close attention to the curves and the lines that I see and trying to match them up in my drawing, just like I see them on my bird. And I'm going to add feathers in, but I'm not just filling the wing in with feather type shapes. I'm looking closely. I'm dividing the wing up into sections that I see. So that could be different sections of color or different sections of feathers, and then drawing the actual lines and the feathers that I can see in my bird. So here's my finished drawing. As you can see, my drawing fills the page. I've also shown accurate proportion because I used my pencil technique. I was able to find the angles of my bird and the correct position of all the shapes within my bird, and I used guidelines to help me plan those out. I've also used line only. Because I'm going to turn this into a painting, I don't want to add any shading or tone with my pencil that will make it more difficult to paint over. So I've used line only. I've also used very detailed lines. So I started off with my light and sketchy guidelines, and then I've gone back over it and included all the details that I can see in my bird and have shown this with line.